Senior observer Catherall adjusted his optical sensors and reviewed the data streaming across his console for the third time. The numbers remained unchanged. The patterns held steady. Yet he could not reconcile what he was seeing with everything he understood about colonizing species. He turned to his junior colleague, a young Vethkai named Solara, who had been assigned to monitor the human expansion into the outer spiral arm. She looked equally confused, her four eyes blinking in that particular rhythm that indicated deep uncertainty. "Run the calculations again," Catherall ordered. "Senior, I have run them 17 times. The results are consistent. The human colonists on Kepler 442b have designated 43% of their terraformed landmass as protected wilderness. They are not developing it. They are not mining it. They are actively preventing any industrial activity within those zones." Catherall made a sound that translated roughly to frustrated disbelief. He had been studying expansionist civilizations for nearly 2 centuries. He had documented the Krethver as they stripped 17 systems of resources. He had watched the Moloxi consume entire planetary ecosystems in their drive for growth. He had observed the collective as they paved over world after world, converting every available surface into manufacturing complexes. These behaviors made sense. Resources existed to be used. Land existed to be developed. A colonizing species expanded because it needed more space, more materials, more room for its population. The mathematics of expansion were simple and universal. But humans did not follow the mathematics. The observation station had been tracking human colonial activity for the past 80 standard years, ever since their first slower-than-light colony ships had begun reaching habitable worlds in their region of space. At first, the Galactic Observation Council had classified them as a standard Type II expansionist species. They terraformed, they built, they spread. All perfectly normal behavior. Then the reports started coming back strange. The first anomaly appeared on their colony world, designated as Proxima Centauri b. After spending nearly a century terraforming the planet into something habitable, after engineering an atmosphere and seeding oceans and cultivating soil, the humans had looked at their work and immediately set aside large portions of it as untouchable. They called these areas nature preserves, wilderness zones, protected habitats. Catherall had initially dismissed this as an error in the observation data. Perhaps the areas were too remote for development. Perhaps they contained valuable deposits the humans were saving for later extraction. Perhaps there was some strategic military purpose the observers had not identified. But as the reports continued flowing in from human colony after human colony, the pattern became undeniable. The humans were terraforming worlds with incredible skill and determination, transforming dead rocks into living ecosystems, and then choosing not to use significant portions of what they created. "Pull up the records from the Tau Ceti system," Catherall instructed. Solara manipulated her console, and holographic images flickered into existence between them. The planet designated Tau Ceti filled the display, its surface now covered in blue oceans and green continents after 3 generations of human terraforming effort. The colonists completed primary terraforming 47 years ago, Solara reported. The current population stands at approximately 12 million humans. They have established 17 major urban centers and extensive agricultural zones. However, as you can see from the highlighted regions, they have designated 38% of the planetary surface as protected wilderness. The highlighted areas glowed soft green across the holographic planet. Mountain ranges. Old-growth forests that the humans themselves had planted and cultivated over decades. Wetlands teeming with engineered species. Coastal regions where the terraformed oceans met constructed shorelines. What did they do with these areas? Catherall asked. Our surveillance indicates they visit them, Solara said, and her confusion was evident in her voice. They hike through them on foot. They sit quietly and observe the wildlife. They float down the rivers in small boats. They sleep in temporary shelters and watch the stars. Then they leave, taking nothing with them. They take nothing? They have strict rules. Take nothing. Leave nothing. These rules are enforced with significant penalties. Humans have been imprisoned for removing native organisms from protected zones. Kethral accessed his own console and began scrolling through related observation files. The data went back decades, covering every human colony world the Observation Council had been monitoring. The pattern repeated endlessly. On Gliese 667c, the human colonists had spent a century transforming a barren super-Earth into a verdant paradise. They had built vast forests, engineered mountain ranges, created river systems that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Then they designated over half of their creation as permanently protected wilderness. The planet now hosted a population of only 8 million humans, concentrated in carefully planned urban zones, while vast stretches of their own creation remained deliberately empty. On TRAPPIST-1E, the colonists had taken a different approach. They had created a world dominated by oceans, with scattered island chains rising from engineered seas. The marine ecosystems they developed were spectacular in their complexity, featuring thousands of designed species filling every ecological niche. Yet large portions of these oceans were classified as marine sanctuaries. Human vessels were forbidden from entering. Fishing was prohibited. The colonists had created an oceanic world and then deliberately cut themselves off from most of it. On Wolf 1061c, the terraforming effort had focused on recreating something the humans called Old Earth biomes. Vast grasslands stretched across one continent. Dense jungles covered another. Arctic tundra dominated the polar regions. And scattered throughout were protected zones where the humans were actively reintroducing species that had gone extinct on their original homeworld centuries ago. Kethral paused at this entry. They are recreating extinct species? Apparently so, Senior. The humans maintained genetic libraries during their early space colonization period. They preserved samples from species that were lost during their industrial era on Earth. Now that they have terraformed worlds at their disposal, they are using these genetic records to resurrect these species and establish new populations. But these species serve no productive purpose. Correct. They are not food sources. They are not utilized for industry. They exist because the humans wish them to exist. This was perhaps the most baffling element of all. Observation protocols clearly stated that a species' actions should be analyzed through the lens of benefit and cost. Everything a civilization did should serve some purpose, should advance some goal, should provide some advantage. The humans were investing enormous resources into creating and maintaining ecosystems that provided them nothing tangible in return. They were building wilderness for the sake of wilderness. They were preserving life simply because they wanted that life to continue existing. Kethral pulled up the communication logs his team had intercepted from various human colonies. Perhaps understanding their reasoning would help make sense of their behavior. The intercepted messages painted a picture that only deepened the mystery. A colonist on Kepler 442b had written to relatives back on Earth, describing a weekend spent camping in the northern wilderness preserve. She had hiked through forests that her grandparents had helped plant a century ago. She had watched birds that her great-grandparents had helped engineer from genetic templates. She had sat beside a river that existed only because human engineers had designed it into existence. And she described the experience as spiritual. A colonial administrator on Tau Ceti, he had given a speech about the expansion of their protected zones. He spoke about the importance of maintaining places where humans could remember what they called their connection to nature. He talked about the psychological benefits of wilderness access. He argued that a civilization which destroyed everything in its path would eventually destroy itself as well. A scientist on TRAPPIST-1 had published a paper about the role of marine sanctuaries in maintaining the long-term health of their engineered oceans. She explained that the humans had learned hard lessons on their original homeworld about the consequences of treating ecosystems as infinitely exploitable resources. They were determined not to repeat those mistakes on their new worlds. Catherall leaned back in his observation chair and tried to integrate this information with his understanding of expansionist species. The humans were not preserving wilderness because they were weak. Their terraforming technology was remarkably advanced. Their ability to reshape entire worlds demonstrated a mastery of engineering and biology that few species achieved. They could exploit every hectare of land they created if they chose to do so. They were not preserving wilderness because they lacked population pressure. Human birth rates remained healthy, and their populations were growing steadily on every colony world. They could use that protected land for housing, for agriculture, for industry. They were preserving wilderness because they had chosen to. Because somewhere in their cultural development, they had decided that pure expansion was not the ultimate goal. That having power over something did not mean they should use that power completely. That creating a living world meant respecting that life once it existed. Solara broke the long silence. "Senior, I have completed my analysis of the long-term projections. Go ahead. If current patterns continue, the human colonial network will eventually include over 200 terraformed worlds. Based on their established protocols, approximately 40% of the total terraformed surface area across all these worlds will be designated as protected wilderness. They will have created the largest artificially constructed wilderness preserve in recorded galactic history." Catherall considered this. 200 worlds. Hundreds of billions of hectares of engineered ecosystems. Millions of created species. All protected, preserved, maintained, for no reason other than the humans believed it was right to do so. "They are strange creatures," Solara offered. "They are," Catherall agreed. "But perhaps we have something to learn from them." He began drafting his report to the Galactic Observation Council. The human colonization effort had been classified as a standard Type 2 expansionist event. That classification would need to be changed. The Council would need to create a new category entirely. Catherall thought carefully about how to describe what he was observing. A species that conquered worlds and then chose to leave much of them wild. A species that created life and then protected it from themselves. A species that understood their own capacity for destruction and deliberately chose a different path. The humans called it stewardship. They believed that having the power to do something did not always mean they should do it. They believed that the universe was not merely a resource to be consumed, but a gift to be treasured and passed on to future generations. As Catherall finished his report, he included a final note. The Observation Council had spent millennia watching civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. Most expanding species followed the same pattern: growth without limit until resources were exhausted, then collapse or conflict or extinction. The humans appeared to be trying something different. Whether they would succeed remained to be seen. But for the first time in his long career, Catherall found himself hoping that they would. A species that could look upon its own creations with love rather than greed, that could choose restraint when power was in their grasp, that could build wilderness instead of merely consuming it. That was a species worth watching carefully. Perhaps, Catherall thought as he submitted his report, the galaxy might one day need to learn from them.